You are staring at a painfully silent screen right now, aren't you? Wondering why a man who was so intensely present just days ago has suddenly wrapped you in a chilling, calculated silence. Here is the brutal, counterintuitive truth that most women refuse to accept. Attempting to fix that distance is exactly what destroys your value. Sometimes, granting an experienced man your absolute, unapologetic absence is the only genuine way to finally make him listen. What you perceive as him pulling away or casually dropping comments that sting is rarely an accident. It is a meticulously designed psychological trap to test if you are desperate enough to abandon your throne for his validation. The very second you get defensive or try to justify your worth, you hand him all your power on a silver platter. But today, darling, that dynamic ends permanently. In this session, we are decoding his tests. I am going to expose the sophisticated mind games experienced men use, and I will hand you the exact psychological weapons to effortlessly destroy them. By the end of this video, you will not just survive his tests, you will own the entire chessboard. Imagine you are sitting across from him. The ambiance is impeccable, the conversation flows, and then he drops it, a compliment that leaves a faint, bitter aftertaste. You are actually quite clever for someone who cares so much about fashion. You smile, but intuitively your stomach drops. This is the conditioned compliment, a velvet glove wrapped around a very cold, calculating fist. It is a classic tactic used by experienced men in the dating arena to subtly undermine your confidence, whilst masquerading as cheeky banter. Why does he do this? Make no mistake, darling, it is rarely a clumsy slip of the tongue. It is a deliberate psychological probe to test the structural integrity of your boundaries. He is meticulously observing whether you will shrink into yourself or scramble desperately for his approval. By manufacturing a microscopic drop of self-doubt within your mind, he attempts to lower your perceived value, making his rather mediocre presence feel like a grand prize you must work to earn. The tragedy lies in how predictably most women react to this trap. Driven by an innate desire to keep the peace or secure his validation, they take the bait, they laugh nervously, brush off the insult, or worse, they begin to passionately defend themselves. The very second you start explaining why your interests are valid, or why your age doesn't define your intellect, you have forfeited your power. You have stepped onto his chessboard and agreed to play the game entirely by his rules. A sovereign woman, however, never negotiates with disrespect disguised as charm. When he attempts this maneuver, do not offer him the immense privilege of your defense or your anger. Instead, gift him your absolute glacial silence. Let the pause stretch until it becomes physically uncomfortable for him. Hold his gaze with deadpan neutrality whilst you take a remarkably slow sip of your Malbec, letting him drown in the quiet consequence of his own audacity. If you feel compelled to speak, a simple, "What a remarkably odd thing to say out loud," delivered with a wry, pitying smirk, is devastatingly effective. By refusing to absorb the insult or fight back, you instantly neutralize his tactic, forcing him to realize he is dealing with a woman utterly immune to cheap psychological tricks. Yet destroying this initial trap is merely the opening sequence of the match. Once an experienced manipulator realizes he cannot shrink you with subtle insults, he will inevitably pivot his strategy, moving from backhanded flattery to a far more insidious game, where he begins to actively accuse you of the very sins he is committing. You will inevitably encounter a moment where the narrative suddenly flips and you find yourself standing in the crosshairs of a completely baseless accusation. He goes dark for 3 days, cancels your Friday evening plans with a vague text, and yet, when you calmly address his flakiness, he has the absolute audacity to label you as dramatic or clingy. This is insecurity projection in its purest, most toxic form. He is taking his own chaotic behavior, wrapping it up neatly and attempting to hand it to you so he doesn't have to carry the weight of his own inadequacies. Psychologically speaking, this is a masterful sleight of hand. An experienced man who lacks emotional sovereignty will constantly project his internal mess onto you to avoid the brutal mirror of accountability. It is far easier for him to paint you as the villain in his meticulously crafted delusion than to admit he is the architect of the drama. Think of his mind as a cinema projector. Instead of dealing with the uncomfortable film reeling inside his own head, he casts the image onto you, demanding that you play the antagonist whilst he sits comfortably in the audience. I know exactly how infuriating this feels. It makes you want to pull out the receipts, construct logical timelines, and defend your sanity as if you were standing trial in a courtroom. But the moment you start furiously typing out a 6-paragraph WhatsApp message to prove you are not being unreasonable, you have already lost the plot. By engaging with his projection, you are validating his false reality. You are putting down your crown to wrestle in the dirt, which is precisely where he wants you, because in the dirt, his chaos reigns supreme. Instead of treating his accusations as a court summons, treat them as a profoundly uninteresting weather report. When he attempts to label you, do not absorb the word. If he calls you difficult whilst he is the one acting erratically, look at him as you would a rather confused child who has just claimed the sky is green. A calm, perfectly detached, "I see you are determined to misunderstand the situation today. We can revisit this when you are thinking clearly," is your ultimate shield. You simply refuse to sign for the emotional parcel he is trying to deliver, leaving it to rot on his doorstep. When you master the art of stepping out of the way of his projection, he will quickly realize that painting you as the antagonist is a futile endeavor. However, do not underestimate the adaptability of an experienced manipulator. If he cannot control the narrative by casting you as the villain, he will swiftly change his costume entirely. He will discard the role of the critic and suddenly drape himself in the velvet cloak of the victim, deploying a far more insidious weapon designed to bypass your logic and hijack your empathy. Picture this. It is only your second date. The candlelight is flickering perfectly, and before the starters even arrive, he is already unraveling the tragic, convoluted tale of his deeply unhinged ex-girlfriend. This, my dear, is the tactical deployment of false vulnerability. It feels incredibly intimate in the moment, almost like a profound compliment that he trusts you so deeply, so quickly. Yet you must understand that a man who bleeds on you before you have even established a foundation of trust is not looking for a partner. He is aggressively hunting for a savior. Why does he weaponize his pain so early in the dynamic? Because genuine connection and earned trust take time, whereas pity is wonderfully instantaneous. By casting himself as the wounded bird, he deliberately triggers your natural feminine instinct to nurture and heal. He knows perfectly well that if he can make you feel profoundly sorry for him, your logical boundaries will dissolve into a puddle of empathy. It is an emotional Trojan horse. He bypasses your rigorous vetting process entirely, smuggling his red flags past your gates under the guise of being tragically misunderstood. It is completely natural to want to be the soft place for him to land. You might secretly think, if I just show him enough patience and unconditional support, he will finally feel safe enough to love me properly. But let me be brutally honest with you. You are not a rehabilitation center, and your affection is not a magical elixir for a man who refuses to do the work to heal himself. When he calls you on a Tuesday evening, spiraling about his past traumas instead of asking about your day, he is not building true intimacy. He is merely assigning you the unpaid, exhausting role of his personal therapist. A sovereign woman observes this premature emotional dumping with a sharp, analytical eye rather than a bleeding heart. She recognizes that true vulnerability is a privilege earned over time, not a monologue freely handed out to a stunning stranger over a gin and tonic. Instead of rushing in to fix his broken pieces or validate his permanent victimhood, you must lean back and offer polite, detached compassion. A gentle, "That sounds incredibly difficult. I genuinely hope you have a good professional to speak to about that," elegantly hands the responsibility for his healing straight back to him. By refusing to wear the therapist's mantle, you force him to either step up and stand on his own 2 feet or wander off to find a more gullible nurse. If his underlying intention was simply to manipulate your empathy, your elegant detachment will frustrate him to his core, quickly revealing the man behind the mask. However, identifying these sophisticated mind games is only half the battle. When an experienced man continuously pushes your boundaries, whether through subtle insults, projected chaos, or manufactured tears, you must be equipped with the ultimate, devastatingly simple conversational weapon to shut his theater down completely. When a man has exhausted his repertoire of psychological traps, your most devastating counterattack is not a fiery debate or emotional ultimatum. It is the utter deprivation of your energy. Enter the steel wall. This is the art of weaponizing complete and utter boredom against his manipulation tactics. The next time he attempts a dizzying mind game or drops a passive-aggressive comment meant to provoke a reaction, you do not justify, you do not explain, and you certainly do not argue. You simply tilt your head, hold eye contact, and utter one single, chillingly polite word. Interesting. Why does this single utterance dismantle an experienced manipulator so effectively? Because men who play these dating dynamics are essentially energy vampires. They feed entirely on your emotional dysregulation. Whether you are furiously angry or desperately seeking his approval, your reaction is the currency that funds his ego. By saying interesting and letting the silence hang heavily in the air, you are bankrupting his strategy. You are essentially telling him that you see the exact puppet strings he is trying to pull, but you find the entire performance far too amateur to actually participate in. Let us put this into a brutally practical perspective. Imagine he cancels your Saturday evening reservations at the last minute with a flimsy, half-baked excuse, secretly expecting you to either explode with indignation or eagerly offer to reschedule around his convenience. Instead of typing out a furious essay on basic respect or staring miserably at your screen whilst your evening slips away, you send back, "Interesting. Have a good night." You then switch off your phone, pour yourself a rather generous glass of Pinot Noir, and sink into a hot bath. Your absolute refusal to engage with his chaos starves him of the power he was so desperate to wield. This glacial detachment creates an unbearable vacuum for a man who is used to women chasing his shadows. Your profound disinterest in his mind games leaves him standing entirely alone, on a stage with no audience. The sheer terror of your indifference forces a harsh ultimatum upon him. He must either step up, drop the childish theatrics, and begin to act like a truly high-value man, or he must exit your life entirely. Either way, darling, you win. You are no longer collateral damage in his little psychological experiment. You are the sovereign woman securely seated on her throne, completely undisturbed by the court jester. By erecting this invisible, impenetrable steel wall, you actively protect your peace whilst flawlessly exposing his true intentions. He will quickly realize that his arsenal of subtle insults, projected chaos, and fabricated vulnerability are utterly useless against a woman who simply refuses to play. But knowing how to dismantle these traps in real time is merely the defensive part of your strategy. To truly master the psychology of attraction, you must ensure that your mindset remains utterly untouchable long after he leaves the room, which brings us to the ultimate realization about the games these men play. Which of these sophisticated psychological traps have you encountered most frequently in your own life? Was it the venomous backhanded compliment designed to spark self-doubt? Or perhaps the exhausting ordeal of being forced to play his unpaid therapist? Tell me your experience in the comments below. Let us dissect their strategies together and build an immutable archive of female sovereignty. If you are truly ready to transcend these amateur mind games, strip away the confusion, and master the intricate psychology of high-value relationships, do ensure you subscribe to Destiny's Decree and activate those notifications. Your seat at this premium mentorship table is always reserved, and it is high time you reclaimed complete control over your romantic destiny. Until our next session, stay elegant, stay analytical, and remain utterly untouchable.